Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the second story from chapter 46 from the Road to Latin textbook. Now this story is called De Orgetorigis Consiliis II, and we're continuing the story we saw at the beginning of this chapter about Orgetorix, the Helvetii, and the migration that they're planning. So before we dive too far into it, like I always tell you, if you want more resources on this chapter, feel free to take a look at my website. You'll find everything you need there, including the first story, translation help, vocab help, grammar notes, everything you might need. Now, since this is the second story of the chapter, I'm going to assume that we're feeling pretty good about vocab and that you've looked through the grammar for this chapter on your own. If you haven't done that, go back and do it, right? Particularly the vocab, it's always important to make sure that you're feeling really good about it, just because it's hard to understand what's going on if you don't know what the words mean. So always start there. And at this point, like I said, you should have read through all the grammar notes about purpose clauses. We have the subjunctive mood, different things like that that we're trying to really unpack, particularly purpose clauses in this chapter. It can be a little tricky if you haven't read through those notes and kind of seen some examples. So start there, kind of work your way through the intro of what the subjunctive is. We covered the present and the imperfect subjunctive, active and passive in our previous video, but it happens in this chapter. So there's a lot of good stuff that you really want to make sure that you have. And again, you can find everything on my website if you're looking for a little more help. Now, before we dive into the translation, like I always tell you, the one thing you want to do is make sure that you're reading the story aloud. So if you can find a classmate, someone to read it to, try to just read it, work on your speaking, your pronunciation, and then when you have your partner, your classmate, whoever it is, read it back to you. Now you can work on your listening skills. So you never want to shut that part of your brain off. It's really important that you dive into it and you're not just translating in your own head. Anytime you can speak the language, I'll read it to you. But of course, my pronunciation is not anything fantastic, but at least I'll read it to you so I have someone to hear it or someone to speak it to you, right? Read it to you. But if you can on your own, try to read it and make sure that you can, find someone in class, something like that. It's really good to never shut that part of your brain off. Make it the language that it is, right? Bring it to life and always read it. The other thing that I'd suggest is do the read and reread method. So when you're actually going through this story, you want to read it start to finish. At least my suggestion would be read it start to finish without looking anything up. Just read it, and whatever you don't understand, write it down, write on a piece of paper, make a list of things you don't get. And then when you're done with the entire chapter, take a look at your list, right? And try to figure out where you went wrong. If it's vocabulary, that's actually really easy. You can look the words up. They're all going to come from the Nova Latin textbook. So if you use a dictionary, something like that, you'll find them pretty quickly. If it's grammar, the part that you're probably messing up is probably purpose clauses, right? And subjunctive. So in other words, the grammar from this chapter. So that would be a good red flag to make sure that you go back and kind of work your way through the grammar and feel really comfortable about it. But the idea is you do that, then you repeat the process over and over again, right? Reading through the story and writing down problem areas until you can hit a point where you're able to read this story start to finish without needing any help, right? There's no problems. You understand all of it. If you can hit that point, you're ready to move on. Okay? So let's dive into the story. Like I said, if you haven't done that stuff, pause it, go back and do it. But otherwise, let's work through the story together and see if we can translate it. Okay? So the second story about Orgetorix goes like this. You have nobiles Helvetici Orgetorigi persuadent ut legationem ad civitates suscipiat, rather. Okay, so we have the Helvetian nobles, right? So we're talking about the nobiles, we're just talking about the nobles, right? The upper class Helvetians. So you're saying the Helvetian nobles, they persuaded Orgetorix, right? So the verb to persuade takes a dative, right? So you're basically persuading to someone is kind of one way to think about it. But they persuaded Orgetorix, and here we have the ut clause, right? It's a purpose clause. So why did they persuade him? Well, they persuaded him so that he might, or you might even say just to, but so that he might suscipiat, he might take up a legationem, an embassy, ad civitates, to the states. So in other words, they persuade him that he should go out and kind of bring an envoy to these neighboring states around them. Okay? Then you have imperant ut sine mora proficiscator. Okay, so you have imperat, they command, right? Or they commanded him, right? Another sort of verb of command in there takes the dative. So they commanded him so that, or that, ut, right? Here's another purpose clause, that he might depart proficiscator, right? He might depart without delay, sine mora, right? So in other words, now they convince him that it's time to go, don't delay, and just go off and leave. Okay, then you have duces orgetorigem monent ut ad civitates proximas eat. Okay, so the duces, the leaders, right? meaning the Helvetian leaders, Monen, they advised, or were kind of warned, probably advised works better here. They advised Orgetorix, right? Orgetorigem is the direct object. They advised Orgetorix so that he might, right? Again, we have another ut clause here, another purpose clause, that he might go out. Eat, there is your present subjunctive, right? So that he might go out to the neighboring states, ad civitates proximas, right? So now they've persuaded them that it's time to go. We need to send a delegation to these neighboring states. It's time to leave. Then you have ab eo maxime postulant ut pacem et amicitiam cum sequanis et haeduis finitimis potentissimis confirmat. So here we have ab eo maxime postulant, right, is the first line, okay? So it's saying they demanded from him, and maxime means like especially here. So they especially demand from him, ab eo, that, and again, we have another ut clause, that he might confirm it, he might declare, kind of confirm or declare pacem, which is peace, and amicitiam, which is friendship. They want him to do this with the sequani, right, cum sequanis, with the sequani and the aedui, right? So here we have the H, the old-fashioned sort of way of writing it, but usually it's just the aedui is how you pronounce that, right? And the aedui are described, or the sequani and the aedui are described as the finitimis potentissimis, right? Their most powerful neighbors. So it's saying, in particular, right, Maxime especially, they want peace with these two groups of people. So if you're looking at the map that I've posted here over to the right, I've put this map before on my videos, you can see the Helvetii are the group that's in between the Alps, right, that corner of the Alps, which is Switzerland, basically, right? You can see them labeled. The Sequani are right to the sort of northwest of them, I guess you'd say. The Aedui are beyond them, right? So they're actually not on this map, but if you go if you're going left, basically, right, west, through the lands of the Sequani, you'd end up in the lands of the Aedui, and this is who the Helvetii want to make peace with. Now we go to the next paragraph, and you have said Orgetorix, in illo itinere patriae oblitus erat, okay? So you have, but Orgetorix on that journey, so in illo itinere, right, on that journey, Orgetorix was, erat, he was forgetful, oblitus, right? It means like forgetful is probably the best way to do it. Patria means of the fatherland. So in other words, he's kind of forgetting his duty. He's not remembering what he's supposed to be doing, because you're going to see there's sort of a plot happening here. You have ipse rex totius Galliae fieri voluit. So he himself, right, ipse, he himself, and this is the reason why he's forgetful of his duty, because he himself wanted to be, right, voluit fieri, it's just a complementary infinitive. He wanted to become, is probably a better way to do fieri. He wanted to become the rex, the king, totius Galliae, of all Gaul. So the reason he's forgetful of his duty is because he wants to be king of everyone. This is the claim that Caesar makes in De Bello Gallico Book 1, which is, again, this is an adaptation of that, okay? Then it continues, you have iet igitur ad sequanos et haeduos et ad nobilibus quaesivit ut secum coniurationem facerent. Or facerent, rather. So you have iet. So he went, right? So in other words, he wants to be the king, okay? So therefore, he went, or he goes, right? Iet igitur, right? To the sequani and the aedui, right? So he went off to these two groups, the ones that he's supposed to be making peace with. And quaesivit, he asked, or demanded, is probably a better way to do it. He demanded from the nobles, ad nobilibus, right? From the nobility, or the nobles. He demanded that with him, secum, and again, here we have the ut clause, right? So he kind of asked them, or demanded something from them, that they might make, right, ut facerent, right? They might make with him, secum, a coniurationem. And again, here's the kind of key word. He wants to make a conspiracy. And this is what Caesar's big claim is in De Bello Gallico Book 1, is this idea that Orgetorix is basically a traitor to his own people, and he's going to screw them over and try to, become king on his own. Okay, well, you can talk about that when you dive into Caesar, but there's an interesting bit of propaganda happening there. So this is the claim, though, that he wants to make a conspiracy with the leaders of the Sequani and the Aedui. Then you have in itinere, filio principis sequani persuasit ut regnum in civitate sua occupare, rather. Itemque dum norigi nobilissimo aeduo ut idem conaretor persuasit. Okay, so on the journey, right, in itinere, right, so on the journey, he persuaded, right? Persuasit. He persuaded the filio. Remember, persuade takes a dative. That's why you're seeing filio there, the dative case. So he persuaded the son of the Sequani chief, Principes Sequani, right? So he persuaded the son of the Sequani so that, right, there's another ut clause. So this is the reason why he persuaded him. He persuaded him that he might seize, occupare, right? Take, seize, regnum, the royal power is kind of one way to do it, but take control of the kingdom is kind of the idea. In civitate sua, in his own state. So here, the conspiracy that's happening is Orgetorix goes to the son of the Sequani chief, right? So he says, hey, let's make a deal here that you're going to take over royal power, okay? Then you have the itemque, right? So, and likewise is how you want to do itemque. And likewise, he persuades or persuaded Dumnorix, right? This is another famous name, Dumnorix, the most noble of the Aedui, right? So nobilissimo Aeduo, right? You can even say the most noble Aeduin is kind of one way to do it. But the most noble of the Aedui, he persuaded him, ut, so that, right, here's the purpose clause, that he might try conaretur, right? It's a deponent verb, right? So you have conaretur, that passive looking verb, that he might try idem, the same, right? So when it says idem, it means try the same thing, meaning try to take over a royal power, command, regnum rather, command in your own state. So the conspiracy that's happening so far is Orgetorix is going off. He's been tasked to go to these two states, but when he goes, he's persuading the princes of these two realms to make a conspiracy with him, right? Join with him, and he'll kind of lead the charge, and they'll all take over their different respective regions. Okay. So now we get to the last part, which is basically the last part of this paragraph, right? So now he's persuaded them, and you're going to see what happens. You have utrique iuveni probavit se suae civitatis imperium obtenturam esse, Helvetios totius Galliae plurimum posse confirmavit. So utrique, right, or utrique rather, right, is talking about both. So in other words, he just convinced the two young men, right, to join him, right. So you have probavit, he proved to the young man. So to which young man is kind of what it would really be, the utrique there. So to the young man, right, he proved that, right, he proved that he obtenturam esse, right? So here's your indirect statement. So in other words, he proved, or you have the head verb, and then it kind of goes from there, the probavit. So he proved that he, say, right, there's your accusative, right? He would obtain, so there's the future, obtenturam esse, the future infinitive. So he would obtain imperium, right, control, or power, you might say, of his own state, suae civitatis. So the first thing that he does to persuade them is he proves to these people, and he says, look, I'm going to take command of the Helvetii too, right? You don't have to worry about it. I'll take command of my own state. You take command of yours, and we'll make a giant alliance, okay? Then you have confirmavit, right? He sort of declared that, right? So another head verb. So he declared that the Helvetii, right? Helvetios, there is your accusative that's really functioning as your subject. So the Helvetians of all Gaul, right? Totius Galliae, right? Of all Gaul, he declared that they were the most powerful. He declared them to be the most powerful plurimum posse, right? So in other words, he's saying that these are the most powerful people, the most powerful groups. He says, don't worry about it. The Helvetians are the most powerful of all Gaul, and I'll take control of them. Okay? Then you have dixit, right? Dixit autem se juvenibus regna conciliatorum esse et eos monuit ut suas copias et suum exercitum expectarent. Okay, so he said that, okay, right, again, and there's an autem in there. So he said, however, that he would unite conciliatorum esse. There's the future again, right? So that's what's setting this whole thing up. We need an accusative to go with it. Say. So he said that he would unite, right? So the say is himself. He would unite the kingdoms, regna, with the young men, juvenibus, meaning the two that he's got, Dumnorix and the prince of the Sequani, right? So it's saying we'll join together, we'll unite the kingdom, and we'll be fine, right? Is kind of the idea. And he eos monuit, he advised them so that, here's a purpose clause, ut, right? He advised them so that they might expectarant, they might look for his own troops, suas copias, and his own army, suum exercitum. So he says, don't worry, I'm going to bring my own troops and my own army. Right? He's giving them that heads up, saying you can expect my army to come through. Right? I'll bring my own troops, right? My own people. And then we end with this last line, right? So you have eis imperavit ne quiquam consilia ostenderent neum metum haberent, rather, okay? And this is something that you'll see. Well, there's a part here, a note coming from the authors that'll kind of help explain this last line. But it starts with this. It says, he ordered them, right? Eis imperavit. So he ordered them that they might not. So ne there is setting up the clause, right? So ne, right, that they might not ostendere, they might not show the plan, consilia, to anyone, quiquam, right? So don't show the plan to anyone. Nor, so neu here is really introducing the second clause, right? And it's saying nor that they should be afraid, right? So literally to have fear. So nor should they have fear, neu metum haberet, right? So he says, don't show the plan to anyone and do not be afraid is really what he's saying, right? Do not show any sort of metum, any sort of fear. Okay, so again, the promise that Orgetorix gives is, hey, if you take care of your lands, I'll show up with mine. We'll all unite together. You can expect my army to come through. We'll kind of rule Gaul together because we're all so powerful. But at the end, he says, hey, just remember, don't tell anyone the plan, right? Don't show anyone the plan, and don't have any fear because I'm gonna follow through on my promise. So that's the chapter. And again, it's filled with a lot of purpose clauses, right? So usually when Road to Latin has a second story in the chapter, they really kind of hammer home the grammar. And this one is really trying to help you with purpose clauses. There's a little bit of indirect statement in there too, which is always good practice, right? Things that are being said without being quoted. But overall, once you get the hang of how these purpose clauses work, and you expect the ut, right? The ut clause, it's a little bit easier to read. So hopefully this chapter, chapter story, was a good way to get that practice and just see these ut clauses in context, right? These purpose clauses. And after you do a few of them, it just gets easier and easier, right? I know it's a little shocking, at least for my students at the beginning, of this chapter, when they haven't really dealt with subjunctive before. They're always looking like, what am I supposed to do with this? It can be a little bit jarring to try to use it, but once you go through it and practice it, it just gets easier to spot. You should be in a pretty good place. Okay. So if you have any questions at all or anything you're worried about, or translation wise, anything like that, put it in the comments below. I'm always happy to help you. But otherwise, just keep practicing, right? Keep reading it aloud, trying to understand it. Again, do the read and reread method. And you want to make sure that you've worked at this point through the entire chapter, all the grammar, the vocab, and that you're able to read the story without too much problem. That's how you know you're really in a good spot and you're ready to move on. Okay? Good luck with it.